this episode, I'm talking with TJ Kirk. TJ is a husband, father, minister, and educator, and was recently named as the new Vice President of Student Services at Freed-Hardeman University. TJ has been in education since 2006, serving in several roles such as principal, assistant principal, teacher, and coach. His wife Sheridan is a special education teacher, and they have 2 wonderful daughters. Now let's face it, middle school is a weird time at best, and for most of us, that life stage was mostly about survival. Voices change, people smell weird, clothes don't fit right, you remember. Anyway, TJ and I talk about how we as parents can help our kids navigate an ever-changing landscape, as well as some ideas for how we can effectively minister to teachers and staff while making a positive impact on the culture of our schools. I think you'll find TJ is a humble and gifted communicator, and I'm so grateful for his time. I learn something new every time I hear him speak, and this conversation was no different. Thanks for joining us, and I hope this conversation is helpful. TJ, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to sit down with you to have a conversation about your perspective, very unique perspective, especially being an educator for 17 years, and in particular, a middle school principal. So thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned, you've been in education a long time, and recently new job as a VP at Freed-Hardeman University. Congratulations on that new opportunity. I'm curious about your time as a middle school principal. I refer to middle school as that beloved, horrible time in life that everyone just has to kind of get through. And if you get through middle school, I feel like you're prepared for just about anything in life. A lot of transition
Absolutely.
and changing going on, both for parents and for kids. What was that like for you as an educator, specifically as a principal? What was your experience like overall for those years that you were in that role?
So it was one where you got to be able to support students through, as you already mentioned, some of the most difficult times in their lives. They're experiencing heartbreak for the first time. They're falling in love. They're starting to question things. There's the physical changes that are happening. And over the summer, I grew 4 inches, or everybody else has grown, and I'm still really small. And so all of those different crossroads in life usually happen around that period of time. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have conversations with young people to help them through those. And so it's a really rewarding period of time if you enjoy serving and helping young people.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still waiting on that 4-inch growth over the summer. One of these days, maybe I'll hit that spurt. But like you said, there's so many different things that are going on, even physically in a child. What are some things that you would identify as the things that middle schoolers in particular need the most from their parents in that stage of life?
During that stage of life, I believe more than anything else, they need parents who are willing to be examples. We have great preachers who are willing to teach the Word of God. We've got youth ministers who are willing to give time to reinforce those teachings. But the best thing a parent can do, especially a godly parent, is be that example, that 24/7 example. How do Christians get angry? How do Christians disagree? How do Christians act when they're scared? How do they handle when they're frustrated with the teacher? I mean, all of those are opportunities to model what it means to be a Christ-like person, and seeing parents do that will be far more beneficial than anything that can come from a Sunday morning sermon. And it will do more to strengthen one's faith if a parent is living out what they're preaching. And one of the worst things for the faith if they're living contrary to what they're claiming to be. And so our children are there to see us in the good, bad, and ugly. And they'll follow the example of, if this is real life, we're really supposed to do the things we say we are, or we put on that mask on Sunday and Wednesday, and then every other day we kind of live how we want to live. So I think the best thing for any age student, but especially a middle-aged student, is an example of what it means to be a Christian 24/7.
I think that's great advice. I do think that sometimes a lecture is the easy way out, right? To talk about discipline or talk about these things, but then if they don't see you doing that, modeling that, like
Right.
you said, then you kind of undermine and you negate your own credibility there when you don't live it as well as speak it. That's great advice. What are some things that you've seen in your experience with regards to the parent and teen or preteen relationship, where parents have some things, maybe some approaches, maybe some specific things, or even attitudes that have negatively impacted their relationship with their child?
So I believe it really comes down to listening. I believe and this, I don't have any data or anything like this to back it up. It's just from what I've seen, and as a parent myself, I think right now parents are dealing with children that don't have a common childhood as they did. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So my grandparents during the summer went outside and played. My parents played outside during the summer. I played outside during the summer. My kids don't play outside in the summer. They want to play
Yeah.
video games, or they want to play on the phone, or they want to play on the tablet. And so there's so many things about my childhood that I have in common with my parents' childhood and all the way back. But this new generation is unlike us in so many ways because of what technology has done and how small the world has become. And so I think the best thing parents can do is listen. I think the worst thing parents can do that will hinder a relationship is assuming they know because they were once a child too. And there will be some things that are in line, but a lot of things we have no clue what it's like. And there can be no greater slap in the face to a child who's going through something that is unique than assuming you know how it is and just responding rather than truly listening to them explain. No, this is different, and I just need you to hear me when I'm trying to explain what I'm going through.
Yeah, I think every generation of parents, they want their kids to have what they didn't, but somewhere probably around our generation or so, we had everything and more. Like I know I had more than my parents did it growing up, So at some point there was a kind of a tipping point almost, and I feel like we're with that now. On the downside of that, with kids, like you say, they don't go out and play very often. One of the best things that happened to us and our family was during the time of the pandemic, we had moved to a new neighborhood, and there were 3 or 4 different families whose kids were home every day, and so they did
Right.
play outside, and that's continued. We've tried to limit it, but it's really easy. It takes zero effort for my kids to then just zone out in front of the TV. It takes a lot of
Hmm.
effort sometimes to get them to leave the inside of the house to go play in the yard.
Right. And it was effortless for us. Hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of effort that goes in to trying to be intentional about what you think is best for your kids, and then to make it happen. And like you said, sometimes it's taking away stuff, but listening is definitely crucial to the whole process. For elementary school kids or parents of younger kids, middle school is coming at some point. Are there some things? Listening is definitely a big one. Is there some other things that you would give us? My kids right now are 7, 5, and 3, and we've got another one on the way. So, especially that 7-year-old, she's going into second grade, which it's second grade has always been young by all definitions, but for me, it's really old. I already have a second grader, so I feel like I've lost some time in some ways. What are some things that we need as kingdom-minded parents who are trying to raise our kids to be resilient and faithful to God? What are some habits or some traditions, some things we can instill into our family life at a young age that you have seen will pay dividends spiritually, middle school and beyond?
Um, this is going to sound maybe a little crazy, but um, I think really working with your children on how to navigate social media is more important than I think a lot of people think. I have a lot of friends who talk about limiting screen time, and I get it. I understand, but the world that we're preparing our kids for is not today. We're preparing it for the world 20 years from now. And I imagine 20 years from now, screen time is going to be most of your day. Social media is going to just become media, and it's going to take over. And as your elementary students get into junior high and high school, that becomes more and more of a dangerous place if they are unprepared. And so it might seem early in second grade to talk about social media and to navigate safe places and unsafe places, or what to do when certain situations come up. But as someone who has had young ladies sit in my office in tears because they were tricked into doing things, um, they had no clue what they were getting into and how devastating it can be, not only for them, but for young men as well. And so the earlier we can prepare them, and I know second grade seems too early, but I'm telling you, um, it's not. And it will pay off in majorly if they have the advice and the wisdom of someone older that is showing them where to
Mhm.
go, how to get there, what to do, what's safe, what's not safe, and all of that stuff. So social media is probably not the answer most would expect with that, but it is the answer that I'm giving, and have seen how unprepared junior high students can really find themselves in a mess.
I talked about this with a friend recently, where we have this delayed adolescence now, where kids are um, immature later in life, more immature later in life, but exposed to more mature things earlier in life
Absolutely.
than they've ever had, and that crossroads is horrifying as a parent, to try to equip your child with tools that they can't fully understand or grasp, I guess, the full consequence, certainly, of their actions. And we've got adults that can't grasp their actions when it comes to social media, and behave themselves there. So why do we think that a fifth grader could just
Right.
naturally get, they're referred to as digital natives because they've grown up in this digital age, but that doesn't mean that they come with all the instructions and the know-how.
Right.
That is a huge thing to navigate for sure. What are something that, again, that I guess we've talked about, this kingdom-minded parenting is kind of the main effort of this podcast, is try to have discussions about that. What does a kingdom-minded middle schooler look like? I know there's some limit on their maturity and their ability to understand intangible things, and that middle school age is really where I feel like a lot of those concepts start to form and to take on some they start to understand more complex things. But in your mind, what are some reasonable expectations for parents when it comes to what their middle schooler can or can't grasp, things that they can and can't understand when it comes to understanding God and faith?
We can overcomplicate the kingdom mindset, Jesus' teachings. Um, but he lays it out pretty simple. He love God more than anybody else. Love your brothers and sisters. And that's a concept on the surface my 5-year-old can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Love God, love people. Love God, love people. And what we can do to help them is, again, to model what it looks like to love God and love people. Um, and we can encourage them to practice doing those things and giving them examples of what that looks like in the real life and in the real world. And so when I think about a kingdom-minded middle schooler, I think of Eden Burleson, and you'll probably never meet this young lady, but she was incredible at walking in the cafeteria and intentionally looking for the kids sitting by themselves. Like, it was amazing. I would watch her. She would find that kid, and it didn't matter if he was black, if he had a piercing through his nose. It didn't matter if he wore crazy clothes or if he smelled funny. It did not matter. She looked for that kid, and she sat with him and him or her, and she would just talk and cut up and laugh and just make that kid feel so amazing that someone was with me. And then the next day, like when she would find another kid, she would invite that kid to come sit with her as she was sitting with somebody else. And so it became contagious. But as amazing as that seems, it follows the same principle. love God, love people. And as we can enforce that and reward that when we see that in our children and motivate to do that, I think we'll come closer to seeing more and more kingdom-minded young people.
Yeah, I love that. It is incredibly simple. That's a great point. Sometimes we make it too complex. I know I spent about 10 years in youth ministry, and navigating the emotions of that life stage to me was one of the most difficult things, because it's such a violent roller coaster sometimes from one part of the day to the next. It's an up and down kind of thing. But what are some things that you feel like youth ministries in particular have done well and that are very successful, and some things maybe that you'd like to see tweaked or changed in kind of the culture of youth ministry today, based on your experience?
So my experience with youth ministry is very little. I was not involved in a youth group as a young man. My mother was in the military, and so we moved quite a bit all the time. However, I guess as an old man now, I have been able to be exposed to youth groups, and I am so jealous of just the family they provide, the culture of realizing I can be with godly people and have a ball. Like I can just have a good time with Christians, and we can bowl, we can laugh, we can sing, we can make fun of each other in a funny way. I mean, it can just be like an extended family and not have to worry about the pressures of the world. And so I love what it can provide when done right as a safe haven of young people who don't need that influence.
Mm-hmm.
What I would love to see more happen with youth groups is the encouragement of personal evangelism. And so, what I see a lot of is, hey, come be a part of my youth group, and that's fine. And I'm not knocking that. Please don't think so, because again, my knowledge is limited there. But what I don't want to have happen is young people who don't know Jesus or don't understand Jesus thinking it's just bowling, it's just trips, it's just all of that, without the instruction. And a lot of that instruction, it can't happen at church. It can't even really happen in the youth setting, because we've all had the experience of inviting someone to church, and then the preacher preaches on Melchizedek, and it's like, okay, well, that
Yeah,
meant nothing,
that's a
nothing at
that's a
all.
tough after dinner mint there. Yeah, to chew
Right.
on for sure.
And so there's a personal side of evangelism that if we were to equip our young people with, that can have conversations in the cafeteria, that could drop drop a few seeds on the bus, and just plant along the way, and giving them the courage to do a little of that work on their own, that could certainly help the kingdom.
We talked earlier about social media in particular, and I feel like a big part of the transition in middle school, especially from a parent to teen relationship, is a growing independence. And there's this growing desire for independence, but sometimes still a limited skill set to fully manage that independence. Do you have any thoughts on what that should look like, for a parent who has a seventh grader or an eighth grader, as they're trying to grow responsibility and give them a little independence along the way, but not to just look the other way and let them completely have full reign of everything? What does that balance
Right.
look like, or what are some things that you would recommend when navigating responsibility at that life stage?
I think if it's treated like any other form of independence we grant young people, um, one day I'm going to have to worry about my baby girls driving, and I don't look forward to that time. But I do know some who are in it right now, and it's terrifying watching those taillights pull away. But before we gave them the keys to drive, there were maybe hundreds of trips that we allowed them to drive around the grocery store parking lot when it was empty with us in the car. There have been several stages of independence that were there, that were monitored before we let them go. And what I've seen is, without a whole lot of practice and instruction and guidance, kids are given a cell phone with unlimited internet. And to me, that's like no practice at all, giving a kid keys to the Lexus and just saying, go, without any type of preparation, any type of, well, if this happens, you need to do this. And they're left to navigate and figure that on their own. And a lot are okay with that, but there's plenty who are not. And so when it comes to dealing with that independence, I think treating it like physical independence is the key. Before a kid moves out on their own, there's several things that happen. They go to camp and they live, in a bunk with other kids, but it's without mom and dad, but it's still supervised, but it's not supervised. And you have those experiences. Right. Or they go live on a college campus and there's dorms, but it's kind of supervised, but it's not. Or mom and dad, they're just a phone call away before you're able to say, all right, now you got rent to pay, and having to navigate that. So monitored, structured practice in that independence is the best way to go before just letting them roam the internet and social media.
Yeah. What are some things we can do as parents to impact the culture of our schools? And specifically, what are some things that we can do to minister to teachers, to faculty, to principals, assistant principals, folks that play such an important role in impacting our lives, especially the lives of our kids? How can we as parents show initiative there and also make an impact in their lives?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of teachers that would love to answer this question, because a lot of times it's a thankless job. And the only time you typically hear from some parents is when something's gone wrong or they're not happy. And so, one, just being an encourager and realizing that it's a hard job, and just showing appreciation for them being willing to do it and being willing to do it the right way, because it's too easy to take shortcuts in the profession. I think another way to help support and minister is being present. A lot of times there are school functions and no parents show up. And there's nothing more disheartening to a teacher who has prepared and wants to share and wants to inform and equip parents with tools that they can use at home to reinforce what's being taught at school. And there's no participation from parents. And so showing up and being present. And then also, whenever a teacher reaches out to share good or bad news, and particularly the bad news, sometimes the response is met with anger, or not even met with disbelief. My child would never. My child could never. You're lying on my kid. You have a problem. And that immediately sets a tone of me versus you, and no teacher wants that. We want to be on your child's team, and sometimes that means discipline. Sometimes that means holding them accountable. And so being on the same page with your child's teacher as far as what's expected and holding them to that can certainly be a blessing to educators striving to help your children be better.
Looking back, reflecting on your time as an educator, what was maybe the most impactful, or some of the most impactful things that you experienced? And maybe it was something along those lines of a parent just showing support or something, but what were some of the things that were most impactful to you personally?
So the things that are most impactful usually don't happen in the moment. The most impactful things happen 5 or 6 years later, when a knucklehead comes back and says, Mr. Kirk, I'm a captain in the Air Force, and I'm that because of 2 things that you did for me, and I want to tell you what they were, and they completely changed my life. That is amazing. Or even a parent that comes back later on and says, you have no idea the impact that you had on my daughter, but I want to tell you what she's doing now, And I want to tell you why she was able to do it, and it has a lot to do with you. And so
Yeah.
I know it's a thing that, after a certain period of time, you kind of forget about those teachers, but being able to reach back and communicate with them the success of your child and just reminding them that they had a part in that, that makes it worthwhile. I mean, the worst day ever can happen, and then you get a message like that, and it's like
Yeah.
I'm good for the next 10 years. Like that's just,
Right.
man. So those conversations are just a reminder of why we do what we do, and let us know we're doing something right.
I think that's important to come back and show that appreciation and that gratitude. It's similar, I think, to teaching is also in youth ministry. You're a big part of the watering process, and you get to see some level of maturation during your time with students, but you don't always see the end result. You
Right.
don't always see where that maturation leads to. So coming back and having an interaction like that, I can see how that would be incredibly impactful and definitely makes you think, okay, this is worthwhile. It's my efforts aren't going unnoticed and definitely making a difference. It's easy to feel like it doesn't, you're just, it's in a hollow bucket, but there really is a drop and a ripple effect there with efforts.
Right.
Do you have any resources or anything that you would encourage parents to look into, especially as maybe in particular as parents are looking for their middle schoolers to prepare for high school? Are there things that they should really be trying to instill or things that they should really, specific things to help prepare middle schoolers for the next stage of high school and beyond?
So depending on the state you live in, each state has a website dedicated to education, and they're all just packed full of resources for students at all ages. And for it to be as resourceful, many parents don't know about it. And so I know at Tennessee, it's tn.edu, and you're able to go there. And I mean, from kindergarten on up, it's letting you know where your students should be. It's letting you know resources at home if you want to give practice tests to see how your student is doing in certain things, the standards that they're going to be learning and covering in school, and even resources dealing with social and emotional type things. They're all there. And so I would encourage parents to start there. If their students are in the public school or even in private school, it's still a great resource to see, where the state thinks they should be at whatever point they are in their education.
That's great. I don't guess I ever really knew that was out there. So I've got some homework to be digging up there myself. So that's great. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts or encouragements or admonishments that you would give to parents that are trying to raise their kids in a way that glorifies God?
I would give this, and I'm preaching to myself right now. I think someone said children are like popcorn seeds. You may put them in the same situation. Some pop early, some pop late. But you can't rush the popping. It's going to happen when it happens. And so you're going to continue, you're going to love, you're going to provide, you're going to forgive, you're going to encourage, you're going to do all of those things. But just because the neighbor's kid seems to get it before yours, it's okay. Continue to be patient, just like God is patient with you, and allow your children to make those mistakes. Be there to help them, but try to avoid the comparison game because you can't win that one.
That's great advice and a great visual as well. It is difficult sometimes to not compare your kids or you as a parent with other folks. Some of
Right.
those insecurities from middle school don't always go away even as adults. So
That's
that is,
right.
thank you again. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and pray that God will continue to bless you in your new endeavor there at Freed-Hardeman University. If folks would like to get a hold of you, is there a way that they can reach you?
Absolutely. My email is tjkirk731@gmail.com, and you can reach me there, and that's my personal email, and I take care of my work on my work email and my personal stuff there. And then also on Facebook, it's just TJ Kirk, and so you can find me,
Okay.
and reach out, and both of those ways are checked often. So,
well, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank those of you for listening. Hope today's conversation was helpful for you. Hey, thanks again so much for listening to this episode of the Carline Conversation Podcast. If it's been helpful to you, please follow and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. It also helps if you'll take a moment to rate the show. It goes a long way to growing the podcast. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share or suggestions for future topics or guests, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or email. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next episode of Carline Conversations.